the results of different kinds of economies or different, but how are they aligned to each other? What kinds of alliances are involved? So cities are full of things existing side by side, which obviously do connect. But so in some ways, what I want to suggest is that this possibility has been there all along. It's not something new. It's something that's been all along in urban life. That cities are full of things that exist side by side, which obviously do connect, but they don't leave any traces of their connection. So many events acting in concert, but seeming to concretize nothing. So the inoperable relations, these relations that leave no traces, reset the scale of the city by ceaselessly changing the modulations of social life as if they were always in sync with a kind of aesthetics that manages to stay out of sight, a kind of invisible infrastructure, a kind of way and a kind of synchrony of actions, a synchrony of people's, of individual actions that somehow are related, but we have no way of tracing what the kind of framework is. We must always act and intervene. This is not to say that we don't do these things, but for too long the urban has been primarily experienced as the urgency for intervention and redemption, the urgency to do something without paying attention to all the resonances among seemingly discordant things in times that have in some ways adapted themselves to each other all along. A kind of mode of connection, a kind of interweaving that can suspend, if not get rid of, the need and the devices to determine what causes what, or how things are specifically related to each other. Sensory tracings of lines back and forth between things is the basis of a kind of urban knowledge. And here it's a matter of generating rhythms and techniques and atmospheres that emanate from the densities of heterogeneous activities and forces that impact on the neurophysiological circuits that modulate a sense of affect, of sympathy, and a preparedness for acting. That is, much of our readiness to do things, much of what we pay attention to, is not something that we can easily explain. It's a matter of a sense of something, of a kind of atmosphere, of something beyond our conscious control. So in some sense, we live amidst storylines that gives the city's absences and voids a certain kind of immediacy and presence. But what are these stories? What are these stories made up of? And they're oftentimes made of disconnected fragments between which flow an endless stream of incomputable materials and patternless data. For example, if you take Laming Road in Mumbai, Laming Road in Mumbai is the center of the electronics center for the city. There you'll find anything you need, any kind of hardware you need. But interestingly, Laming Road is also the center of Asia's largest archive of stories. The people the association that runs all of these electronics stores, in some ways you talk to them, the electronic stores are not their main job, they say. Our main job is the collection of stories. All of the people who came to Mumbai and disappeared, no traces left. All of the people who came to us looking for those missing people and that we have spent our lives trying to find. All of those people that won't go away. All the people who come to us and say, we can't get rid of our lovers, we can't get rid of our business associates. No matter where we go, they always show up wherever we are. All of the informal deals that people make and that prefer not to do them in person, where they keep boxes and boxes of records of these. These are all the kinds of stories that are archived here, of all these kinds of infrastructures, of ways in which the city provides a kind of locus where things relate, but we don't know what the infrastructure is. We don't know the exact technologies. We don't know exactly the logical stories involved. It's a store full of stories in which the city is lived, but in these stories is full of patternless and incomputable data. So in some sense, what then to give you an example of what might then be the way in which we inhabit a city and a world where relationality becomes something of a kind of danger. What kind of space is possible, perhaps, if our notion of the majority district no longer is the kind of possibility for the majority of residents, particularly within the South, to live in. And this is when I want to end on this notion of compression, the notion of compressed space. So in contrast to endless relations after relations and the imperative that everything has to relate, perhaps what might be required is a much more sense of a generic orientation. And by generic orientation, I mean a ground that has no particular definition, something that can show up in various forms without contradiction, something that does not have to be realized empirically according to specific criteria, but yet brings about a sense of people being in concert. Okay? This is the sort of working notion of the generic, where compression is neither the powerful or the weak, neither one thing or another, but it's a withdrawal of distinction. It's a kind of subtraction from having to say who you are. It's a kind of subtraction from having to outline all of the particular kinds of relationships that are involved. So the generic is something that is possible in every imaginable form. The generic is never in a direct relationship with anything else. It is indifferent to what it determines. So it cannot affix itself to any particular urban forms through immediate forms of causality, reciprocity, and exchange. It is irreducible to any particular instrumentality. So the generic is something that always shows up in strange ways, and it turns the expected into something both recognizable, but always something off, always something weird. So in the center of Jakarta, this is what I would see as the kind as a generic, as a kind of weird space. Now, by looking at it, you would never think that within the Jakartan context, this is the most cosmopolitan residential area in the entire city. This is a place where every single apartment has a different price, even though the apartments basically all look the same. This is a place where you can find queer people living next to super Muslims, living next to large families, living next to single professionals. This is a place where you can find everything and anyone, basically. Now, you would never know that, because in some sense it is a kind of compressed space. It hides its multiplicity in a way, even though the multiplicity is apparent to everyone on a kind of daily basis. So this is known as Kalibata City. It's only 5 years old. It probably won't last a long time because it's so cheaply built. It's in a central location, and you ask people, what is it? What is it? And the answer that you'll get most likely is it's a space. People won't go to long stories about it. Oh, I'm related to it this way because I came here from this neighborhood and I'm this kind of worker and this is what. It's simply a space. How does it work or not work? Something happens. You see, the kind of minimal compressed within this is many, many different things. What is there? Many different things. So within the sort of daily life of restlessness is attributed to something that cannot be precisely named. That is, Kalibata City becomes a kind of mode of appearance for a place that enables actors to write themselves in whatever is happening. A place where anyone can look upon it or within it and can recognize something of themselves within it. You can write yourself in. Okay? You can see something of yourself there. Even though the kind of style, the kind of aesthetics, it's not like you're creating a space that announces, oh, this is me and my uniqueness. This is me about all the connections and relationships I have. It's a space that allows you to write yourself in to it without necessarily having all of the tropes and the signs of your uniqueness. So, is it a new form of auto-construction? Obviously, it wasn't residents making it themselves, but clearly residents have made the way in which the life is there. So it's an ongoing aspect of auto-construction. Is it a consortium of local developers? Well, yes and no. Is it subsidized housing? Well, yes and no. Is it a money laundering project? Well, yes and no. It's all of these things, but because all of these things exist with all of the other things, it's impossible to know for sure how much of it is a money laundering project. How much of it was in some sense subsidized housing? How much of it was really consortium of local developers? In fact, 5 years ago when people bought apartments in this place, they have now gone to court to try to get their property back because so many subtenancy things have happened. No one knows who controls what space any longer and what precisely goes into. So this is in some sense what I mean by compression. Within this single kind of space, within this single kind of area, there are so many different kinds of forces and logics and operations that are compressed. You don't know for sure exactly what is at work. And if you're not quite sure what the component elements are, it's very difficult then to make clear relationships amongst them. So there's a kind of opacity, there's a kind of withdrawal from the need to understand what the relationships are. And that particular kind of appearance, that particular kind of way of operating may be something that is important at this given time when relationships become something that are so used against us. Also, final points, so many different kinds of money are brought to the table in this. So many ways of mobilizing finance are brought and compressed in this one space. So it's all of these different kinds of things. So it's not just